run a seminar in Kalmia, in the frame of which with our participants we discuss about curatorial strategies, about how to work in a context where we miss institutions, where we miss platforms for exhibiting art, for presenting it publicly. So you are also welcome to join it if you are willing to do some practical work or share your own approaches during the next few days. But tonight we have this opportunity to learn a little bit more about the city of Iowa's context, US context, and about Kalmia's personal work. And so you're welcome to prepare many questions, and then we can also discuss a little bit, like going deeper into some details. We have around 1.5 hours. So, welcome and your
thank you. Thank you all for coming. This is good. I'm less nervous. I can't see you. If at any point I am speaking too quickly or too softly, please tell me. I very much appreciate being able to give this talk in English, and it's generous of you to let me do that, and to be here. This is the title. I first wanted to thank folks, including you, for being here, Oberleaf for hosting me, CEC ArtsLink for sponsoring my residency here, and Cohos for hosting me very generously as a collaborator and helping me be present here. And then also, whenever I talk about my work, it's really important for me to give thanks to all of the many people that I have been able to work with, because all of my work is collaborative in some way, and there are far too many people who have been a part of it, who have taught me and worked with me, and so I just piled them here in the corner, some of them, so that they are present here with us. Mostly I will talk about some projects that I've done in collaborative groups, but I thought I would share a little bit about me. My background, I studied, I've always been studying books, and always been interested in publications and specifically how they are used in social contexts. So not always just what's in the books, but how they're made, how they connect people in different ways. And I studied that both in undergraduate school and graduate school, also studied libraries and art, specifically related to bookmaking. And I, over the last 12 years, have been living in Iowa City, which I'll talk about in a minute, working on print and book work, somewhat independently, but also working in a library space, and making installations, doing curation, working collaboratively with other artists and organizers, and I can share more about this, but I'm more interested to talk about other things. I've been surprised. A lot of people here I've met have said, oh yes, I know where Iowa is, which surprises me because people in the US don't know where Iowa is. They think it is Idaho or Ohio or another state. But if you don't know, here it is. It's in the middle, mostly, of the US. That's where Iowa City is, the red. It is very agricultural state. So these are we have three main products, corn, soybeans, and pigs. The fact that people like to say about Iowa is that there are 4 times as many pigs as there are people in Iowa. So that's sort of the context regionally that I'm coming from. And then Iowa City is a community that has about 100,000 people and a couple of towns that are close to each other. It is home to a large university that has thousands and thousands of students and a hospital, so there's a lot of activity, a lot of people coming to town from all over the world, really, and all over the country as well. And so it's active, but as you might imagine, because of the location, it's not New York, it's not Los Angeles, it's not like a central. It's very much a marginal place in terms of what kind of attention and resources for creative cultural practices. I will say that Iowa City is, I think, very proud of being a very cultural town. It's like a UNESCO City of Literature, and there's this phrase that people like to use, the greatest small city for the arts, which I think is aspirational, maybe hopeful. And I would say that there is a lot happening, but also it's a hard place to get people to stay in. People come and then they leave. That was my plan. Also, I came there for school and planned to leave after 2 years, and now have lived there for almost 12. So that gives you a little bit of information about where I'm coming from. These are just some photos of normal life and also protests in Iowa City last year. So most of the work that I do, or at least half the work that I do, and mostly what I'm going to talk about tonight, is through Public Space One, which is an organization. This is our website, and we are an organization, but we try to function very much like a collaboration, a collective, and have gotten a lot bigger, so it becomes can become more bureaucratic, but I think there are still a lot of small groups doing creative projects, just sort of and Public Space One trying to be a platform and support for those. This phrase is sort of the description that we use, and I think I like to share it because it talks a little bit about the way that we approach things, and this is related to what I'm going to talk about tonight. So artist-led, so that means that everyone who works there, our board of directors, we are trying to give power to artists, to creative people, and trust that they have the skills to lead an organization. I don't know, in the US, often arts organizations will be led by people who are maybe have not a creative practice, which is completely fine, but that's not how we approach things. We want artists to be the people leading, and then also community driven. So that means that we try to be really responsive to what's happening in our community, and also make sure that we are a platform and a place where anyone who's interested, whether they think that they're an artist or curator or any sort of creative person, can be involved and have input, make things happen through what we do. And so that, and then of course is the contemporary arts organization. So if we're talking about contemporary art, at least from the way that I understand it or talk about it, is art that maybe is breaking with traditional models, is experimental, is critical, maybe socially or politically engaged. And so this interaction between like making sure it's a place where anyone can be involved, so very much community oriented, and then being a contemporary art space where like really challenging experimental things can happen, are sort of this balance that we're trying to strike, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight. Just to give a little bit of more background on the organization, it's been around for almost 20 years. I have not been involved that whole time, but we've been in a couple different spaces around Iowa City, mostly sort of marginal spaces below or above other places. And then 2 years ago, we sort of emerged into being located in these houses that are on the right, and we're able to make our permanent space here and have actually an interface with the street directly, which is really exciting and kind of amazing to me still that this is happening. And so, yeah, that plays into a little bit what I will share. And these houses, people used to live in them before we occupied them as an arts organization, and through a process with our city, we were able to start to buy them, which will take a long time, but so that can be, so it can be a community space, because there's no other houses on that block, just businesses. All right, so, I guess the other thing I wanted to say about Public Space One is, so we do a lot of things, and some of them include like really trying to support professional artists or people who want to be professional artists, so that includes training, I guess I'll go back while I'm talking about this, training, opportunities to exhibit, funding opportunities for artists, when we can, but the other piece of what we do, again going back to this balance maybe, is arguing that art is essential in everyone's everyday life, and that community participation, as I mentioned, and experimental and creative practices don't have to be in different spaces, that those things don't necessarily negate each other, or and in fact, I think in a lot of cases, and my experience has been that they actually can support each other and make especially interesting things happen, if we're not limiting contemporary art to being a space just where people who think they know what contemporary art is are going to be in. So I'm going to share in depth a couple of projects that I've worked on with others, that try to do this in a couple different ways that are outside of our gallery space, which isn't a traditional gallery space but does have art exhibitions regularly, and uses spaces that are either public spaces or spaces that people already understand. And actually we talked about this a little bit in the seminar conversation earlier, a space like a cafe or something that people already know, anyone knows like how to enter into that space and what that is for them, whereas a lot of people may not feel comfortable going into a gallery or not know how to act when they go into a gallery. So the first one I'm going to talk about was a project called the People's Pyramid, which we did in 2014, and I couldn't believe that when I was putting this presentation together. It feels like not that long ago. And this was a pyramid, an inflatable pyramid that this group of people and some others who weren't there in this photo designed and built and installed for 12 hours in this central plaza area in downtown Iowa City, right next to this very tall, for us, glass brand new building. The impetus behind this, well, I don't know if I remember all of the reasons, but one of the things that the group was thinking about was like there was a lot of controversy about this glass building and tall buildings in Iowa City in general. There are more now, but there were not many even at this time. And thinking about, or asking people to think about public space and buildings and how just sort of open their brains a little bit about that. And so we, I think, decided to use a pyramid because it's this sort of like, if you drop sand or something or dirt, it forms a pyramid. It's like this very basic structure, right? And of course triangles are very strong structurally. This doesn't apply so much with inflatable things. I don't know if anyone here has ever built a large inflatable, but it's not as easy as it looks. Maybe it doesn't look easy. It took a long time to figure out how to do this, and we actually all the day of had knives in our pocket just in case it like took flight, so that we could slit the pyramid and rescue it from flying away. That didn't happen, but there was some concern about it. So we had this inflated all day this day. Here's some pictures of the process of testing it, building prototype, testing it in another space at night. And then the day that we installed it, it was so obviously, as you can see, it was a space not only that you could see, but that you could go inside like a building. And it created this kind of crazy light box space inside, very bright and soft, because the plastic was not completely transparent. And we had a couple of different activities during the day, and we invited anyone who came by in this very busy area of town to come inside the pyramid, hang out. They could write or draw on any part of the body of it, which is like not a particularly like, it was really, maybe we had some prompts. Actually, I'm not sure now, but when you give people markers, they're going to write whatever they want to write, of course, right, on it. And so this happened over the entire day. A lot of children and families, of course, but then we also had this like way that anyone who wanted to could interact with this space and be a part of it, and were welcome. And then we also had some more experimental things going on. So on the left side, you can see some of my collaborators were performing this radio piece by John Cage that's like an experimental sound piece where you're tuning radios using a score happening at the same time. And so this was like our attempt to sort of place a very like enticing maybe community space and like people just around with their kids with some experimental work happening as well. Here's some more photos of what the situation was that day. We also had some other printing activities going on outside the pyramid. And then at night, used it as a projection screen as well. I can see even some of the things, you probably can't see them, that people wrote that were fine. And people could actually also build on, I don't know how clear it is, build on like miniature inflatables to the outside as well. So the idea to invite people who did not know that they were going to come encounter this thing to participate in making or just in the experience. And this was, I think, for our group, one of the first times that we did a project that wasn't just, like we had done plenty of projects in public, but I think they were ones where we were just trying to sort of push our weirdness or experimentalness and like sort of pass by, but not actually see what it's like to invite people in to participate as well. And so this was sort of the first big project, I think, that we were sort of testing out what does it mean to like actually create this space and like sit with it all day, not just like have a like pop-up strange art experience that then vanishes and people don't have a chance to engage with. What's next? So that was People's Pyramid. The next big project I want to talk about is called Near Future. And And this project was one that I co-organized, co-curated with 2 other people, but then a lot of others were involved in the project itself, and it was initiated right after the 2016 presidential election in the US, which was upsetting to us and a lot of people. And we were thinking about how there was a lot of talk about like how do artists respond to this election of Donald Trump and like other things that come along with it, and like does art even matter? I mean, like lots of angst, right? And ultimately this became a space that was less so much about the election and more a way to again experiment with like how do you create a space that's both for community members but also like asks for some criticality and experimentation. So we managed to convince someone to let us use this empty storefront space that was on a main street, and at that time our organization was in a basement and like no one knew where we were unless they already knew. And so to have this window space was really exciting. It was, as you can see, at night, activated with some prints and lights. We had an LED and some other things when it wasn't open at night, and then we're there open during the day. It wasn't every day because I remembered having this conversation like, oh, we should be here every single day, and then thought, oh my gosh, that would be crazy. That would never work. And so I think we were there 3 days a week, but open, and it had previously been a store, so people thought that it was a store still, maybe, or like some sort of weird concept store. So that was a really key point to the project, was like maybe not tricking people, but like people came in who might not have come in because of the type of space that it was. So you can see on the wall, it was this, I forget what it's called, like with little holes where you can hang things really easily. And we basically invited anyone who wanted to come in and to hang their artwork. And we were specifically thinking about artwork that was somehow politically engaged, but that really became sort of an expansive space. And so this photo shows part of the way along the way, and actually there's a space heater, and that reminds me of this too, because the space heater was a very important part of the space as well. There's another photo of the outside. So we had people coming in throughout the month, 2 months, and sometimes people would just come in and like look around. Sometimes people would come in and then come back and bring work to show as part of this exhibition that was sort of continuously building and accumulating itself over the course of the project. And some of the work that was in it included prints, included songs, people performing songs, pamphlets and things for a library. There were hockey sticks. There was a guy who brought a bunch of handmade hockey sticks that he had made, and then some interactive work, and sort of social benefits. We also documented most of it with this made-up news channel that we made called Near News, and asked artists to share a little bit about their work as part of their submission process. Some examples, there's one of the people doing their song as part of it. We also hosted a printing session. So we have a community print studio that was in our actual location, but we brought over part of the printing process so that people could come and design things and print them on site. Actually don't have very many photos of that day because it was so busy with people printing that no one took any photos until afterwards, except for this one. And you can sort of see in the background the raw space, and then this in the back, like that was an interactive installation that someone designed. Let's see. The other thing oh yeah, we opened the space up also to people who wanted to not just submit like a physical piece of artwork, but wanted to host something in it. So these folks hosted a punk benefit show in the space, and someone hosted a one-day symposium in the space about capitalism and art. And the other thing about it, as I mentioned, because it was a storefront space, people just wandered in thinking that they were going to get something else. And it also, though, was a place where we had coffee and tea, and people could just sit and be with the artwork and watch maybe some of the near news videos that we had produced as part of that. Okay, so that and that just lasted for a couple of months. It really sort of came up out of the response to the election, and but looking back on it, actually, it really I think shaped a lot of the things that we ended up doing in the future, and realized, maybe making us realize as a group that it was important to be in a space where people knew where we were, that there wasn't something particularly positive about being underground just for the sake of like being a space that, I don't know, that maybe that was an important part of what we wanted to do, is make sure that there are people coming in who might not otherwise be engaging with some of the things that were happening, or might participate and just not be connected yet. The other sort of big project that I'll talk about, and then I'll talk about a couple quick things, and we can discuss, or if people have questions, is a result of us being in this new space, the houses that are surrounded by a lawn, grass, although we're trying to convert it completely to not being any grass at all. This is the art gardens. Kimberly, who is in the photo there, deserves the majority of the credit for this, because she's the person who's been there every day making these gardens happen. And this started in March 2020, so right at the beginning of the pandemic. And she had actually proposed this before, but because of the pandemic, because we didn't have anything happening inside our spaces for a long time, this became this very, very especially important space, these art gardens. And on the bottom right, you can see sort of what space was like before, just grass, nothing. And she and other people are slowly turning it into this, basically it's a private space because it doesn't belong to the city, but we are treating it completely as a public park. People can come there whenever, and it doesn't even, our public parks close at night, and so this one is not closed at night either. Kimberly and collaborators, including me, have been transforming this space. They're growing flowers, food to give away, and inviting anyone to come through, sit, participate if they want to, or just be in the space. It's, again, interesting because like a park, people know, okay, it's okay to be in this space, to rest and sit in here, just look at things. They feel maybe comfortable with that. And Kimberly is an experienced gardener, but also takes a very artistic approach to it. So on this here, she's been spray painting the leaves of these lilies, actually, and they survive it, which is interesting. Doing things that maybe gardeners might question as being positive, and also like making things, installations. So like this bottom one is full of fake fruit. This was in February, so nothing was growing yet, and so like creating these things that use both non-natural materials as well to like create this sort of ongoing installation space, and inviting children and anyone else to like really interact with it, make sure that it's a space that people feel like they can really, really use. Another slide of this. Oh yes, and so other people are invited to be a part of it, because people are walking by on the sidewalk. They are able to see how things change over the course of the season, but then also slowly maybe get invited to being a part of it or get tricked into coming to a performance or something. It also has sort of become a gallery, and we reopened our gallery earlier this year, but the garden itself still feels sort of like the most important part of our space. People are performing outside, installing sculptures. This person on the right, Tim Tabor, he runs a daycare for children in Iowa City, and he collects items from his work doing that over decades and makes these installations, shrines about day job, like what does it mean to have a day job as an artist. So that's just one example of what's happening in the art gardens. And so the last things that I'm going to share are just some more thoughts and examples about using spaces that aren't traditional art spaces, and how they can be engaging. And I'd love to hear if people have thoughts or experiences about doing this kind of work, or what's problematic about it, or what anything. I'd be really happy to hear from anyone after the presentation. Libraries, not everyone feels comfortable in a library, I know, but are another space that maybe, at least in theory, is for everyone, a public library. And so this is another way that we, and I especially, because I am, because of my personal interests, am interested in as a place where you can create a space where people can engage with art or critical cultural practices in a way that feels more comfortable than being in like a museum with a gallery installation. So on the left is this zine, an artist book library that I run, which basically just means that I've made it and put things in it, and people can take them or not take them and bring things. This near future also, I think I mentioned before, had a library as part of it. This is a library in a suitcase that was hosted in our space for some time. We also have a library of free art supplies that we take out. I was talking to Clara about this the other day, that we take out to events and give people art supplies, and hopefully encourage people who haven't, might not want to or feel comfortable or good about like doing something creative, painting or drawing or anything, because maybe they were told that they weren't good at it at some point, to have something free so that they can try something, no pressure. It's an interesting project. It's more challenging than I thought it would be, trying to give people free art supplies even if they want them. And then we also have an art equipment and tool library that's cooperative, so people can borrow things like sewing machines or other tools that they might use to make. And there's no, we don't ask, what are you using this for? It doesn't matter what the project is. Anyone can use them. Meals and cafes, of course, are another important place for gathering in an art context, but also a thing that everyone needs to do. Here's some examples of these. The one on the right was last year we had this big storm where the entire city, basically, except for like a couple blocks, including ours, lost power for days. So we had a cafe as part of that in our outdoor space. Food, of course, is so important. And then this starts to go back into sort of like spaces that might be more traditionally identified as art, but also just like thinking about, as I was thinking about this, just like remembering the importance of, and this could be in any of these other outdoor or public spaces as well, like shared spaces where people can make things without pressure, can just have things that they can work on or that are responsive. So on the top left is our space was a place where people were making protest signs during the Black Lives Matter protests last summer, and just like making a space there, having spray paint and stuff that people could use for that particular thing, but then also creating spaces, both pop-up and then permanent. On the right, the larger photo is our community print studio, a more permanent space where people can share a working space together and feel welcomed. And I think the thing that, I'm trying to remember if this is so the thing that I feel like I was thinking about in preparing this talk that's really difficult to represent through photos of a project, because they're just photos of a project, is like what has to happen during this work, like the interpersonal parts of it. It's one thing to make a giant inflatable pyramid and be like, hey, people come in this, we're being weird in this public space, but another thing to like really have conversations with people as part of the project, and to like try to put into practice approaches and ways of, especially I think, talking to people and welcoming people that are really horizontal, that are like have hospitality as a part of them, that make sure that they are welcoming people from multiple generations, so children, older people, all the way, the whole spectrum, that like welcome people asking questions and asking you like, why are you doing this, or telling you it's stupid that you're doing this, that value many voices and allow people to have their voices to be heard, and to make sure that things don't have to be fully complete as part of the project. So, and making sure that knowledge can be shared as part of the project. These are all the things that, for me, like in photos of projects, I can't really share, but wanted to mention because that's sort of part of actually doing the work, right? And it's the hard part as well. And I think that I know personally that sometimes I feel like I'm successful at doing those things, and oftentimes I feel like I'm not successful at doing them, or I try, or I'm too tired to do it, or whatever. And it means that the work is very slow and difficult and sometimes confusing. But I think the thing that I really wanted to share and then open up for conversation through, maybe in response to or with your own, my examples, or with examples of your own experience, is like how do we set up structures and spaces, whether they're pop-up temporary or whether they're ongoing spaces that are really inclusive and welcoming spaces for people, but also like have a piece that's built in that means that people can do challenging and experimental art practices there as well. How do we keep doing that, trying different forms of doing that, what's successful and not successful? And I'm sure, of course, that it's also very specific to all of my experiences that I'm talking about, right? And this is why I started with, this is where I'm from. They're from Iowa City. I'm in the middle of the US. This is what we have done there. But I think that things are, of course, culturally specific, maybe specific to certain communities in different places as well. And so I would especially be interested to hear from anyone who wants to talk about that as well. That is all I have to share tonight for the formal presentation. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm happy to chat more, answer questions, anything else. Thanks.
Thank you, Kalmia. If anyone wants to, didn't understand something, maybe it was too abstract, just relate to your questions. Or if you want to comment, maybe on related to this practice, and you have your own work to share, that's in this space, kind of more, less formal way of talking. I can also switch on the light, it will be more.
Sure, whatever. Yeah.
I was asking, how do you deal with the area of controlling the people you work with and the spaces that you build? Because I find it very challenging to trust, like, when dealing with lots of people, giving responsibilities to others, and I have to trust them, that they will respect the people that they interact with. How do you deal with the control stuff?
Oh, that's such a good question. That is such a good question. And I don't know if I have a good answer because I have the same challenges. Public Space One has grown quite a bit in the last couple of years, especially, and that's made it even more challenging because when we were working as a small group, there was at least within the collective, like some trust built, and I felt like we all knew sort of where that group knew itself and so could work collectively and then work with community members and other people. But yeah, I think that when the groups become bigger, then you sort of start to have to establish some like expectations and guidelines, and that can really kill a lot of, it's important, but also can like really put a damper on like flow and creativity. I mean, it really varies from project to project. I think we aren't successful a lot of the time. I mean, I know that I feel like sometimes, especially like sometimes we'll go out and say like, take some printmaking stuff and do an activity and say, oh, anyone who wants to host this activity can do it, but without, like saying, oh, you should make sure that you treat people in this certain way, or like these are the values that we're bringing to this project. And that's been a problem before. I don't know, do you have anything specific that you want to share, or it's okay if not?
I'm curious if you establish any hierarchy, like where, I mean, if you take the role of the leader of the group, or if anybody takes this role, or if you try to avoid this, and if you try, why?
Yes, we do. So our organization now, when I started working together with it, we had no people who were paid at all to be a part of it, and now we have a couple, including me, part-time, to do some things that must be taken care of in order for the organization to exist. And so when that happens, there's like a natural hierarchy that you can't avoid, but that we do try to really like very, very consciously like not be like a power thing, but a way to consider those of us who have those roles to be caretakers and like resource providers rather than the person with the power who makes the decisions. But it's unavoidable that there's going to be some power dynamics. I think it depends on the project. Like for the near future project, it was me and 2 collaborators, and it was our project. Like, so we ultimately, I guess, did decide together. I mean, we collectively made decisions, but the 3 of us made decisions about how to do it. And because that was a discrete project, that felt okay to just say, this is our project, we do it this way. We set up a system in which we want lots of people to be able to participate freely, but we are establishing this. And so maybe it's about defining like what the scope of where the hierarchy is, or are we talking about the whole organization over years and years? Are we talking about this one project? That's something that we think about a lot, talk about a lot, and have challenges with, like the many people who are involved. We try to make consensus decisions, but of course that's really difficult.
We actually will have a meeting on Saturday when we will talk more about the way Kalmia's organization works internally, like how they are organized, if they support each other in which way, and so on. So maybe these kind of questions, I mean, if you want to join on Saturday also, it will be, I believe we will learn quite a lot about this internal kitchen.
Yeah.
How they call it.
Good and bad, maybe. Did you have?
I just want to my personal experience in this is that it's like to be politically correct until the end, it's impossible. And at some stage, just to avoid chaos, it's just better to assume that people hard to say. But it's not a bad thing. It's just like, I think we are like that. So far, it's my conclusion, but maybe you'll prove you wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I think about all the time because I'm working with people all the time. And I did more recently realize, and I felt like I should have realized this sooner, that like structure is not by nature a bad thing. Like I think I was like, it's only going to be good if everyone can do whatever they want all the time. But like creating structures actually creates, in some cases, like more freedom because people don't have to figure everything out every time they do a project, right? Or they don't have to, they can say, oh, someone's, like you're saying, someone else is taking care of this, so I take care of this thing. That can be a really good thing.
Yeah, it creates a space for trust.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
All of our questions are about internal structures. Shall we keep them for Saturday?
I don't mind. I love talking about, I mean, obviously because of the kind of work that I do, I think it's very interesting, but we can't talk about anything.
Very interesting the question that you posed at the very end, because it was love that there is such a balance between what is an art space and what's a communal space. So how do you balance that? Who are the people that work there? Do they consider them artists or the community workers? Because you have this project that they're quite delicate, talking about giving this free supply, so there has to be like a delicate language. It's almost like psychological work. So like social workers.
Yes, I have so many times, especially in the last couple of years, thought I am not a social worker. What am I like? Because sometimes like people want to sleep on our porch or whatever, like trying to change, like make sure that our procedures that we have for certain things are inclusive of people who are neurodiverse, for example, is something that we've been working on lately, and it's like I don't have any training in that, so I think it's something that knowing what you don't know, I guess, and like when to try to work with other people we are an art space, like that's our primary identity, and we just want to be an art space that maybe makes it a lot harder for ourselves by making sure that like we are including more people and encouraging people to either consider themselves artists or participate in creative practice. But that hits home. I don't know.
How do you think about asking the owner of the store, empty store, to just give it to you?
Yeah, it was nice. We had to pay just for the utilities. I think it's because it was temporary. We've tried to do that a bunch of other times and it didn't work. So like many other times. That was lucky, I think. I don't think they were trying to rent it at that point. But we actually did a project this past year that was so frustrating where someone else asked us to curate artist installations in windows of vacant spaces, which seems like a great idea in theory, right? Like why artists want to show their work, the business or the building owners want it to look like there's something happening there. And it was we even had a little bit of money for it, and it was just so hard because the building owners were like they said, oh, it's fine, you can do whatever. And then we showed them the work, or we put the work up, and they're like, oh no, but not that. This is too, and it wasn't anything real crazy. It was just like someone's taste. So I think that was lucky. I have had a lot of bad experiences doing that kind of thing. I think you have to decide whether you want to spend your energy like trying to deal with owners of buildings and landlords and things. I mean, sometimes you have to do that, but if you're doing it by choice.
So you have just a few part-time people that actually are paid, and the rest are volunteering.
Yeah. And we try to sort of, we try to make a lot of different, like people, some people just like pour lots of time and energy in if they are able to, and then some people can just show up every once in a while, and we try to make sure that there's a space for all of that, but that's also a challenge, of course, because you don't always know what to expect. But yeah, we have 4 staff that are paid.
I have a question. You've been using some space and you moved to another space, and now you end up in a building, from a very nice building. But you still continue working with outside spaces, or like, why wouldn't you just stay in the building and enjoy your life there?
That's a good question. I think, I think that we have, maybe because we have that outdoor space at our buildings now, like we can use that and not have to get permission or anything, deal with the city or any other issues. So that is appealing. And we have used the outside space that's ours a lot more since we've had it. But I think and I know this is something that is important to overlook, and you like thinking about, like, there are so many other spaces in a city or town, any community, where cultural things can be happening, where interesting art can be happening. And so we have like a project that's a project in media festival that's just once a year, but we're going to keep doing that because it's more interesting to put all those things in different spaces, not just our own same building all the time. It has limitations for sure. So yeah, I mean, the fact that their houses is also like that puts a really different, it's a different kind of space than being in a space like this, because it has, like, I don't know, it looks like someone lived there, because they did. Does that answer your question?
Well, the question is if you have other reasons to go outside of your own art space. What are those reasons?
Well, I also think, it's in one neighborhood that's near to the downtown central area of Iowa City, but there are other cultural organizations, but we're the only contemporary art organization and the only one really focused on visual art. A pretty expansive idea of visual art. And so I think that if someone else was doing something in another part of town that was parallel to us, then we would not be like, oh, actually, we're gonna do this. But if there's nothing happening, or we get invited, then that's a good reason as well, because there's definitely in Iowa City some, I would say, like, their neighborhoods are divided, and I think this is true in so many cities, right? Like, there's a big road, and so a neighborhood is like cut off from being able to easily access like the center where there's cultural things happening. That's so common, and so making sure that we do projects in those spaces as well is important. If the neighborhood is good with it, anyway.
And do you try to get involved more actively in the local political life? Maybe not going to elections, but rather raising issues which are important to the community, and which way, of course, this sedition in the context of elections.
Right.
Dealing with that.
Right. Iowa City is small enough that it's really hard to not do that. Like, it's, I said 100,000 people, but that's like a couple of different towns, and Iowa City's the biggest one. But like, I know, several of our city council members, not because of my work, but just like personally, because they live, it's like a small enough place that you're gonna be, if you're doing any sort of public work, you're gonna have to engage politically in some way. We recently did a project like that just finished that are these very large murals on a parking ramp that was funded by the city but have to do with racial justice and Black Lives Matter, and that was a very complicated political project that I'm happy to talk about. I feel like it's so fresh that I have not really talked about it too much. I mean, other than in the context of the project. So that was definitely something, and it was fairly controversial. So that was a recent thing that we worked on. And yeah, well, I mean, I think that for me, my assumption is that like most of the things that we do, even if they feel like, oh, this is like sort of a feel-good participatory thing, have some like political or social impetus behind them, even if it's something kind of small.
And how is your organization positioning? Like you are part of civil society, and in the US, what does it mean to be part of civil society? Is it to be closer to the public sector, or to be kind of closer to the private sector?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't. We're a nonprofit, is what, and so that's like, it's sort of between the two, right? Like we're the government, the federal government considered us technically to be a charity, I guess, meaning that we are doing something that is intended to be for the good of everyone. So that's sort of what that means in the U.S. But we still have to operate like a business. I mean, the operational part still has to be the way that a business would do it. There's no profit involved, I guess. So we don't, no government connections.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, but do you feel like closer to, I mean, in Moldovan context, civil society often means against the private commercial sector,
Yeah.
but also against the public sector, because public sector itself was very often representing the private sector or used by the private sector. Like you would have, I mean, classical example of oligarchs being in the parliament, or city developers living in the city, being in the city council and voting for.
Yeah.
So then civil society here has somehow to defend from both.
Right.
Be against both. So I wonder how is it in the US?
Yeah. I mean, that feels like, obviously the context is different, but fairly accurate still. I mean, I think that it's, I mean, I do feel like that often we're sort of working either in like an anti-capitalist way or against sort of commercial interests, though that also feels like it's coming from like the personal desires of those of us who are involved, and not everyone is on the same page about that necessarily. And yeah, I think there's a balance too, though, of, I mean, we have worked with like our city government a decent amount in the last couple of years, and that's felt like a very delicate thing to do while still like being independent and making sure that we retain ability to do what we want, because they're not ultimately, like, if they're going to give money for a project, then like we get to do the project the way we want to do it, for example. But it's very complicated. And because when I first got involved, we were a very small organization, didn't have to worry about we didn't have to worry about things, that sort of stuff as much, because no one was paying attention. But then you start doing bigger things and people pay attention better or worse. I don't know.
I'm interested in your calls or invitations for participating in the space. How do you spread it, or in which channels, or in which infrastructural space or community?
We have a couple different things that we do. We do an annual open call that is meant to be, potentially international. We don't usually have money to bring people internationally, but we actually had some artists from Bucharest a couple years ago. And so that gets curated by a team of volunteers. And we sort of put that out, on various open call websites and try to get out through a network of people who participated. But then also, especially like within the local community, we have this sort of open platform that's essentially first come, first serve. We have some structure saying like it can't just like people can't have their wedding at our space or whatever, but like something that's culturally related. I guess you could argue that weddings are cultural, but whatever. Some sort of art-ish project. And on just like if someone wants to use it for a day to do whatever, they can approach us. Hopefully they give us a donation if possible. It's sliding scale. And so that sort of like goes in parallel to the curated. Does that answer your question? Maybe.
Yeah, I think I asked the question because I'm interested how, as it's like open for everybody, still it will still stay in a bubble or kind of bubble, or if you on purpose, for example, try to put some effort in totally different spheres or places.
Yeah, that's a. Yeah. I think we do. I think especially on a more local level, local and regional, do like more effort to like reach out specifically. If we being, I don't know. It depends on the. But we as an organization, I guess. But there are different groups. Within it, we might reach out specifically or do specific outreach to a community, or like in Iowa, for example, like to more rural communities, and make sure that like people know what opportunities there are, if for example. But I think, and then with the open call that I mentioned, we also that group, which is just a group of community members, some of whom are artists or have art training, but also just some people who are interested, try to balance. This is less about outreach and more about curation, I guess, but like balance bringing people who sort of might show in alternative art spaces all over the country versus people who maybe never had an exhibition before or might not be interested in doing an exhibition in another place, but are a local person who wants to show their work, and we try to really balance that. But it's always a balance. I guess it's tricky. Yeah.
I would have one more question, but maybe still someone from the room.
Can I say, I just wanted to say thank you, and hope to see you again.
Yes.
But I need to go because if I will not catch the traveling mask,
Please
I
go,
will
yes.
see you December. So thank you.
Oh yes, thanks.
I have a question about your collaboration with libraries.
Sure.
I mean, here libraries are probably one of the most accessible open places, like you said in your case. And it doesn't seem too hard to work with them. They're always kind of welcoming you with activities. They have audience to put you in touch. But we struggle to open other cultural institutions like museums, or theaters, like public, municipal or national level cultural institutions, which are very close. They're kind of inaccessible, basically as a fortress. So do you have any difficulties, similar difficulties?
Yes.
Like
yes, we do. Yeah, the museum.
If you try to deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a little more success with the museum. That's part of the university, so it is like part of the government, technically. But only after years and years of just showing up to things and talking to people and like seeing, oh, this person doesn't like what we do, just like, but for years, the museum was just like, not, did not want to work with us. Yeah, I think libraries, the library thing is interesting because when we talk, I know I'm bringing my own bias because obviously I have a background in that, I care about them, think they're important, but I also think like, and so maybe I'm bringing that to our organization also, I'm sure I am, but I also think like that approach, we of course have like our public library that has books and things, but then we also have this project in town called the Bike Library, which also operates like a library but to do bikes. Like to me, those organizations are the ones that like feel most like we're allied, like we're on the same page with those people much more than we are with the art museum, even though we're an arts organization. There's of course overlap, but it is harder to work together because the values are different. But it's, I think, still important to try. I don't know, I change my mind depending on how I feel about whether trying to overcome that difference in values or approaches. Sometimes it is useful because audience is bigger, maybe you can change things, but sometimes it feels like too much for me. We've had not recently, I think because having our new space actually has helped because people are like, know where we are, and so like slowly it feels like maybe we're a little bit more legitimate, and so maybe the theater will be willing to work with us, but that's changed in the last couple of years quite a lot, I think. There are not also so many like public, like government connected cultural institutions in the US, as you probably all know. We have like very little support for cultural anything from the government. So
it's true here it was all state.
Yeah.
And the US probably is maybe private.
Yeah, completely. I mean, there's a little, of course, the federal government has some museums and things, but it's very, very little. So it's very different in that regard. If anyone else wants to talk in a small group or ask questions, I'm happy to hang around for that. But
anyway, we meet on Saturday, 7 o'clock, I believe, here. So if you want to seek out maybe more some informal situation and ask questions or talk, join us for this discussion. We would like to talk a little bit about Casa Zemsky as a cultural center, what would it be in the future, and we would like to see other examples of self-organizing with the communities who stay together to do something together. Yeah, that's the main idea behind the from you subscribe to the seminar, join us tomorrow from 5 o'clock. Next 3 days from 5 to 8 we will be working on the curatorial practice. Even if you didn't subscribe, you can still join. It's still open.
It's true.
And we are interested in curatorial practice outside of traditional institutions, let's call them, but also in relation to marginal activities which are not part of the main art discourse. Creativity happening somewhere else than we think traditionally is happening. Thank you for joining tonight and see you soon.
Thank you.